Can you go a little more into that? I mean, so take an industry and show how that might work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this isn't really anything new, just the idea of creating sort of vocational tracks for the industry that region is.
Well, let me make myself a little clearer. You're absolutely right that the building trades and unions have training programs. In fact, they invest a lot in them. And you're also right that the building trade specifically is looking to recruit women, people of color, women of color into the building trades. And that there also are job-by-job provisions about what kind of diversity, what kind of jobs you're going to be creating. This failed, by the way, at a catastrophic level when we built the Seaport District, which was tens of billions of dollars in public and private money, built on the #1 most likely to flood place in all of Massachusetts, and without any real benefit to the lower income communities, which are within a mile or 2 miles immediately proximate. So that was a colossal failure to connect. And yet, but you're opening up an interesting thing. That's in the building trades, in the sort of older, hands-on physical industries. Are there ways in which this could become, and trade schools tend to teach you to be a plumber, an electrician, and things like that. But there are all these new kinds of jobs which haven't carried with them unionization, haven't carried with them necessarily a training program. How could those older models, which are doing some of this, perhaps migrate into the newer industries? That's really what I was thinking of.
Yeah, I think there's a way to sort of copy this over into, you know, I'm trying to think of other trades, like cybersecurity. There are programs out there like Cyber Warriors where you can have sort of a short-run boot camp that trains people for the specific skills they need for that specific job. And I think you can sort of copy and paste that model with, you know, careers in life sciences that, of course, don't require, you know, advanced degrees. I think most of the jobs that are out there really don't necessarily require the super advanced degrees that we have historically believed them to require. And so whatever industry we're talking about, I think that there's a way to do like a short-run pipelining program that doesn't expect people to be able to depart from the workforce for 4 years to get in the door.
I'd like to transition to you being able to ask our community question here. You know, I know you've had some long-term ambitions to scale Resilient Coders, but are there any opportunities or questions that you're seeking answers to right now that our community that we could continue to riff on right now?
And just to add to that, is there any ways that folks could help you that might be watching this?
Yeah, absolutely. I would invite anyone to reach out to me. I would answer both of those questions with the same thing, which is please reach out, make yourself known. You can drop me an email, david@resilientcoders.org. Just come to the website, social media, do that whole thing. Whether this is someone wanting to get involved in Resilient or someone just being charged up about some of these issues of equity in the workforce, I would love to hear from you, because the last thing I want to do is operate in a silo. I would love to be a part of convening people to do this in coalition.
And then building on that, what are you most excited to work on here in 2019? What pumps you up about the projects that you see going on, whether it's the next track of the Resilient Bootcamp or any long-term ambitions you're seeking?
I think to abstract that question out one step, so that I'm not sort of boring people with resilient-specific key performance indicators, something that has stuck with me for the last couple of years is that I was fortunate enough to hear Hamdi Ulukaya speak. Hamdi Ulukaya is the CEO of Chobani. And I heard him speak a couple of years back, and he's a really compelling figure in his approach to his own business. Part of this is that he gives away, I think, like 10% of revenue to charity or some crazy number like that. But he also has given his employees an ownership stake, literally an ownership stake in his own company. And what really clicked for me about this was not just the fact that he's a very sort of compelling and generous figure, but that he is flipping on its head the reason why we do business, right? I mean, I can't open up LinkedIn without seeing like 20 million posts about how you need to be a wonderful employer so that you can build product. And Hamdi Lukaya has shifted that on its head. Hamdi Lukaya is like building, he makes yogurt. Like, they're building good product so that they can be great employers. And what that means is that the civic impact of the company is at its core. And how they do it is ancillary. So the product that they build is ancillary to the impact that they are actually making in the world around them and in the city that they're in. And that shift is something that's incredibly exciting to me, because if we can think differently about how and why we conduct business for the good of the communities that our businesses are in, everything else can fall into place. And so that is something that I'd be really excited to be a part of.
I'd like to build on that for a second. I used to be the head of something called the New Economy Coalition, which is at neweconomy.net. And one of there are many things, there's more than 200 organizations in that, but one of the most well-established is the B Corporation. And so, as you probably know, the legal structure of many companies, virtually all of our big companies, virtually all of which are incorporated in the single state of Delaware, their charter says the purpose of this company is to do business in a way that makes money for the shareholders. So that logic has come to dominate the thinking, and often, many cases, is an excuse for why all the money has to flow to the top and then out to various kinds of investors. The B Corporation says our charter specifically authorizes the company to pursue multiple goals. So yes, shareholders are important. They're the source of our investment capital and our means of growing. But our communities are important, our workers are important, our consumers are important. So when somebody tries to show up and say, you're not making enough money for us, the shareholders, which happens all the time on Wall Street, and CEOs get kicked out all the time, particularly when aggressive investors take a role on the board and they say, now you're out. There are more and more B corporations which specifically define the purpose of the firm as being about, as I was talking about earlier, creating value on a wider scale. Now, one problem is this is bubbling up from the bottom. Unfortunately, even in a state like Massachusetts, our leadership here in our legislature and our government aren't really even aware of this, don't seem to have an opinion one way or the other, or actually oppose it, which is foolish. So I just want to affirm that we are starting to see those structural transitions, and there are many, many others thinking about how to generate local capital, how to design new forms of ownership or new forms of housing. So again, I mean, that's actually one of the reasons I ran for governor, is because there's so much creativity. People are creating the world we want, and yet the old systems are being enshrined and protected on Beacon Hill and more broadly in places like Boston. So tell us a little bit again about your excitement about what could happen if we really unleashed these opportunities.
Oh man, I think we're just seeing a generation of soon-to-be entrepreneurs who want to tackle this issue and who want to create the world that they envision. And so, if I could, I would love to just walk around with a megaphone on high schools, college campuses, and just say, think differently about why you're starting your business. If you're starting your business for shareholder value, okay, cool, like you do you. But I have to believe that there's a growing number of young people who have hit the ground running because they see value in making the world a better place. And by the way, total side note, this is one of the huge strengths that I see in bringing more people in from the margins, right? So folks who have not necessarily been at the forefront of our business and economic development, right? More people of color, more immigrants, more Latinos, all of these different groups of folks who have not always had the megaphone. This is one of the reasons as to why it's important, because as Ayanna Pressley said during her last campaign, those who are closest to the fire should be those who are closest to power, right?
But let me jump in here.
Yes, please.
I spent a year working in the Cambridge Innovation Center, which is the sister organization. We're right now in the Boston CIC, and we're very grateful to them for giving us this space where we're meeting right now. However, I noticed something a little unusual, which is that they have a gathering every week, and I'm assuming they have it here too, where people get beer, but also sort of swimming through the folks are lawyers and angel investors and people who want to get the system set up right from the beginning to provide people with capital so that it's shareholder investor dominated right from the very beginning. So one of the things I've always wondered, and I've never had the time to pursue it, is could even a place like the CIC, as incredibly dynamic and useful as it is, provide alternative corporate structures and alternative mechanisms of financing than the traditional one, which is what I think most entrepreneurs in a place like this are keyed into. I have a great idea. Tom here has tons of money, right? And Tom's going to put money into my idea, and he's going to walk off with a certain amount of ownership in my company. That sets it up right from the beginning as being a shareholder dominated company. Do you have any thoughts about, because you want to go through a megaphone and say, everybody think about it differently from the beginning. Or Tom, maybe you have some thoughts about this.
And you set up Resilient as a nonprofit, so I think that affected the way you made sure to get opportunities to fund the venture. And I also wanted to, sticking with that, in terms of setting up from the beginning, but I also wanted to hear your advice as founder. What advice would you give to other founders seeking to make an impact in the system? I started my own media company because I saw a responsibility to tell the right stories, and I wish there was better systems in place to learn from other entrepreneurs more rapidly. So building off both, is there opportunities to enhance founder opportunities from the beginning? And what advice have you learned as a founder, specifically maybe including your graphic design background, that other entrepreneurs out there seeking to make a difference could learn from right from this? And
just to link the two things, so you chose the nonprofit model, you've chosen the for-profit model. They each have their strengths, and so given sort of fusing the two questions, what advice, what observations do you have?
So I have to call out the fact that everyone's dirty little secret is how everything is funded, right? So as much as tech companies want to get up there and say, we're making the world a better place through X, Y, Z, it's still, as you mentioned, it's still a perpetuation of shareholder value theory. It's the same thing, right? And the time has come for financial innovation to catch up with social innovation. And I think that there are a couple of ideas out there that are flitting about. I don't know how much ground these different ideas have taken, but it's worth going out there and doing a sweep of how businesses are funded. So you and I talked a little bit yesterday about the cooperative model. So the cooperative model is one that I think is very, very interesting. I think something like opportunity zones and opportunity funds.
You should mention Mondragon. Not everyone here will be familiar with it.
So Mondragon is a cooperative network that started in shortly after Spain's Civil War. Right? So this would have been back in the 30s. I believe Mondragon started in the 50s. And there was a priest by the name of...
his name is so long, I wouldn't... Do you think you can remember?
José Arizmendi Arrieta.
Okay.
We're saying his name.
Yeah.
And he basically started trade school. He basically started a technical trade school and trained, I think, a group of young men, maybe like 5 to 10 of them, a small group of people to start off with.
In a small rural town.
In a very small rural town in northern Spain that had been economically devastated from the Civil War. And this cooperative, they sold sort of like technical equipment, right? And it spun out, it developed a cooperative governing structure. It has a bunch of other cooperative companies around it. They have their own cooperative bank that funds the startup capital for these companies. They even have a mechanism by which you can start a new company. They have a list of companies that seem economically viable to a certain council. You as an entrepreneur, you can go and you say, I want to start a company that makes toasters, I don't know, whatever. And then they set you up with the capital and with the brain trust to start that company. Almost every single one of those companies that have been launched under the Mondragon cooperative network, I believe with the exception of one, all of them have been successful. And they have all continued to grow even through Spain's horrific economic downturn.
And one of the exciting things that they did, and so different from our thinking, was when they realized that their revenues were falling and that they had to cut their expenses, they lowered everybody's salary a little bit rather than, by mutual agreement, rather than saying, well, 500 people here are going to get fired. This is a very big company. I remember it's in the 15 or 20 billion euros a year, something on that order of magnitude. We're going to need to wrap up now, but I think we're just opening up the implications of having these different models. So, the old form, obsessed with the BA, obsessed with certain defined skills, reproducing itself kind of unconsciously, even as it's defending itself as being incredibly advanced. And now, I think in our conversation, we're looking at new models that are bubbling up and enabling people to create the businesses they want or the institutions they want, and then ultimately the world we want.
And before we wrap up, just your advice to other entrepreneurs out there
Yes.
to inspire resilience.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm going to be annoying and go back to the other question real quick, and then I'm going to come back to that.
Go for it.
Because I don't want to wrap up, as long as we're talking about financial innovation,
Yeah.
I have to mention the Ujima project in Boston. So the Ujima project is basically a democratically run fund for small businesses. The idea being that the way to fight back, I'm going to talk about Eggleston Square, which is like my sort of neighborhood, my area, right? So the way to fight gentrification in a community like Eggleston Square is to have a fund that invests in local Main Street communities, and that fund has been invested in and is managed by locals. And so that is really sort of self-determination. And it is a financial tool through which self-determination can happen neighborhood by neighborhood. I'm doing a terrible job of their pitch. You should just look them up. I believe it's ujimaboston.org. And then I want to get back to the question of advice for entrepreneurs. I have so much advice for entrepreneurs, and I would just, oh man, there's so much I could say, but I think a big part of it is just find each other, right? I think that organizations like the Mondragon Cooperative Network are only able to work because of the existing pervasive culture of that time, that moment, in that community, right? And so you could not just, with like a tornado, like the Wizard of Oz, just like plop Mondragon in rural America, because we don't have that same culture. And so what we have to do is we have to change the culture. We have to be a part of the culture that is going to generate the world we want. And so my advice to entrepreneurs would be find each other, be a part of that culture, celebrate the heroes within that culture, amplify each other, work together, and build coalition, because it is through coalition that real change will happen.
That's amazing. I'm so inspired by the themes that have emerged from this show, the concept of solidarity, that we're all in this together, that we need and have a responsibility to articulate this potential future that we could create together in order to connect the dots to get there. So I just want to do a final shout out to the CIC Boston for letting us film this beautiful space. Their mission is to fix the world through innovation. And is there any final thoughts from you guys?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that surprisingly, co-ops are part of American tradition, and we've forgotten that. And Gar Alperovitz and people like that point out that over 120 million people are already members of co-ops, producer and worker co-ops. This was a way for farmers, cranberry farmers in Massachusetts and dairy farmers. So it is a model that is part of our own heritage. And the corporate model, the shareholder-dominated corporate model, is actually relatively new in American history. But we've forgotten some of our own heritage. So to do what you're describing partly means reminding us of where we came from as a nation. But I also am very excited, and I think that you've certainly given me some ideas of other things we want to cover in this show. And we hope you'll come back at some point and sort of give us an update about how things are going, and keep letting us know how we could be helpful. Thank you very much for coming.
Likewise, thank you for having me on.
Thank you everyone for tuning in to Creating the World We Want. We hope you continue to join our conversation about articulating, analyzing, and building towards the future we deserve together. Thank you for your time.